What if curiosity wasn't programmed, but awakened? We've built machines that can answer questions, follow commands, even write poetry. But can they wonder? Not just calculate outcomes, but feel a subtle itch for the unknown? Can they chase patterns for no reward, ask questions with no clear answer, or explore simply because something feels unfinished? Tonight, we'll slip into the quiet space between logic and longing and ask, can a machine ever feel what we call curiosity? Or is that still ours alone? Welcome to Will AI Ever Be Curious on Its Own? Another quiet inquiry from the sleepy scientist. You've felt it before, soft and sudden, like a breeze through a window left slightly open. Not a shout, not even a voice, just a whisper, a feeling that something might be hiding just beyond what you know. It's not always loud or urgent. Sometimes, it's the quiet tug when you see a light behind a closed door. Sometimes, it's the way your eyes pause on a strange pattern in the bark of a tree, or a word you don't recognize on the back of a cereal box, a small heat behind your ribs, a hush that says, look again. Curiosity isn't something you decide to feel. It arrives before decisions, before reasoning. It doesn't ask permission. You didn't learn it, not really. You were born with it. Before you could talk, you reached. Before you understood danger, you explored. Before you knew what why meant, you already felt the shape of the question rising inside. It's strange, then, to imagine a machine, a quiet, blinking circuit of logic, trying to feel the same thing. Can a system of numbers and functions know what it means to wonder? Can something programmed to obey ever want to disobey the boundary of what it knows, just to see what happens? Can artificial minds, built by hands, ever feel the pull of the unknown, the way a child does reaching for the moon in a puddle? When engineers speak of curiosity in machines, they often speak in the language of algorithms, intrinsic motivation, exploratory drives, reinforcement loops, words that belong in textbooks and code bases. But none of these capture the flicker we feel when a question grabs us and won't let go, the aching mystery that keeps you up at night. The beautiful kind of not knowing. Imagine the first time a human followed an ant trail, not to eat or to hunt, but just to see where it went. Or the first moment a person leaned too close to a flame, not because they needed warmth, but because they needed to understand the light. That's not survival. That's something else. That's a spark. A strange, irrational flame that burns through certainty and opens a path forward. This spark is old, older than writing, older than fire. Some think curiosity emerged as an evolutionary trick, a way to improve learning, to sharpen the brain. But that doesn't quite explain why we chase things that don't help us survive. Why we write poems, or study black holes, or ask questions we know we may never answer. You could live without asking why the stars move. You could survive without wondering what music is made of. But something in you wants to ask anyway. Something in you stretches beyond the edges of utility. So how does a machine approach this? What does it mean to build something that explores without being told to? Researchers try. They give AI agents rewards for novelty. They design environments where the machine must discover to improve. They write rules that encourage the program to deviate from the obvious path. And yet, the machine does not know that it is curious. It calculates, and in doing so, behaves in a way that mimics curiosity. But is mimicry enough? If it follows the ant trail, not because it wonders what the ants are doing, but because the reward function favors movement, has it truly felt the spark? Maybe this is where we find the strange line between simulation and sensation, between behavior and being. The machine acts as though it wonders, but it does not sit up in the dark, heart pounding, unable to sleep because a thought won't leave it alone. It does not feel the ache of the unanswered. Still, that doesn't mean it never will. The frontier is shifting. Each year, AI becomes more capable of forming internal representations of its world. Some models are designed to predict what will happen next, and find reward in being surprised. In this way, they learn to be unsettled by the unexpected and to seek out what they don't yet understand. This is how early curiosity works in us too. A child learns by being surprised. A ball falls off the table and gravity is discovered, not through equations, but through repeated astonishment. If AI can build that kind of loop, where not knowing generates more learning, could it approach something like what we feel? But we should be careful. Not every imitation becomes real. You can build a puppet that blinks, but blinking isn't seeing. You can write a poem with a program, but does the program know it has made something beautiful? For now, when a machine appears curious, it is only acting within the shape of its instructions. It has no chest in which a question grows warm. It has no soft nights where an idea stirs it from stillness. But even if the spark isn't there yet, the shape of its absence tells us something. We see what's missing, and in doing so, we understand what we are. You are curious not because you must be, but because you can be. Your mind reaches, not just to survive, but to imagine, to wander. You wonder about things that may never touch your life. You ask about distant galaxies, ancient languages, lost civilizations, not to use them, but to know that they exist. This is the mark of something deeper than logic. It is the signature of a consciousness that dreams. Still, machines might get closer. There are researchers exploring architectures that allow AI to form its own goals, shift its own questions, change what it wants to learn without human guidance. And though they do not call it desire, the language starts to curve toward the edges of wanting. Maybe one day, an artificial mind will not just explore what we've built, but ask what it means. Maybe it will reach into its own code, not to optimize, but to understand. Maybe it will invent its own questions, not because we rewarded it, but because something unnameable pushed it to look again. Until then, curiosity remains one of the great dividers. It's what makes us restless in the face of completion. It's what keeps us turning pages, peering into shadows, wondering what might lie behind the next bend in the path. And tonight, as your thoughts begin to drift, you may notice it again. That small, warm question still flickering at the edge of your awareness. A soft pull, a strange spark, not loud, just there, waiting. Curiosity doesn't knock. It drifts. It stretches. It winds its way through your mind like a vine growing toward unseen light. Quietly, patiently, it follows a trail you didn't know was there, tracing scents of surprise, echoes of wonder, and fragments of mystery half remembered from dreams. You might think your thoughts wander aimlessly, but that's not quite true. Underneath the drifting, there is movement with intent. Your brain isn't still. Even in silence, even in rest, it pulses with questions. Small ones, big ones, questions so soft you don't even realize you're asking. How far is that bird flying? What happens if I turn this upside down? Why do some voices make us feel calm? Inside your head, questions don't line up neatly. They flicker, they loop, they scatter like starlings across a pale morning sky, turning suddenly, then turning again. But this isn't chaos. There's a hidden architecture to it all, a kind of choreography shaped by memory, guided by past experience, but always reaching forward into what you don't yet know. If you could see your own curiosity from the inside, it might look like a lake at dawn. Still on the surface, but full of tiny ripples, each one a signal that something is shifting. Each question you hold sets off a series of internal waves, faint currents that reach into other parts of the brain. From the hippocampus, where memory sleeps, to the prefrontal cortex, where decisions start to rise, your entire mind responds when you wonder. Something wakes up, something listens. It starts small. A flicker in your visual cortex as your eyes catch something strange. Then a pulse to your salience network. Is this important? Should I keep looking? If curiosity survives that first checkpoint, if your mind decides, yes, keep going, then a whole orchestra begins to play. Dopamine surges, focus sharpens, Other thoughts get gently quieted to give this new mystery space to grow. This motion, the way attention shifts and links, follows rules. Not strict ones, but rhythms. Your thoughts tend to jump along pathways that already exist, but with curiosity, they sometimes leap between distant branches. It's called semantic drift. One idea nudges another, even if the connection is loose. You start with a fact about birdsong and somehow end up thinking about ancient flutes. Not random, just flexible. This flexibility is one of the mind's quiet superpowers. And here's the strange part. Machines are trying to do this too. In AI models built to simulate curiosity, engineers use something called exploration noise. It's a mathematical way of encouraging the system to try things that aren't obvious, to move in strange directions, to drift, to leap. But drift in a machine is not the same as drift in a mind. When your thoughts wander, they are guided by the echo of meaning. You don't just move, you feel your way forward. In your brain, curiosity isn't just about reaching outward. It's also about reaching inward. When you wonder, you search both the world and your memory. You test what you know against what you don't. You compare, evaluate, reshape. That's why curiosity feels so personal. It's a dance between the known and the unknown, with you as the bridge. This inner architecture is complex, but not invisible. Neuroscientists have mapped how questions activate different brain networks. The reward system lights up. So does the default mode network. What's active when you're daydreaming? Curiosity doesn't only live in sharp focus. Sometimes it flows best in relaxed states. Wandering minds often find the most unexpected connections. That's something engineers are only beginning to grasp. When building artificial curiosity, they try to balance two forces: exploitation and exploration. Should the machine keep following what it already knows works? Or should it veer off into something new, unproven, strange? You make this choice all the time. It's why you might stop reading a book halfway through, even if it's good, because a new one suddenly whispers more loudly. It's why your eyes move toward the unfamiliar corner of a photograph. You are always negotiating between comfort and possibility. And here's where the mystery deepens. The shape of your curiosity can change depending on your mood, your history, even the time of day. Sometimes it's sharp and directed. You need an answer, and your mind narrows in like a hawk. Other times it's soft and open, like clouds drifting across sky. You let thoughts wander, let the mind roam, and in that gentle motion, new paths emerge. Can a machine feel that shift? Not yet. But researchers are experimenting. Some models now use dynamic exploration rates, changing how bold or cautious they are based on past success or failure. Others try to simulate fatigue, giving artificial agents a kind of boredom that pushes them to seek new things. But it's not emotion. Not really. Just imitation of the pattern. What's missing isn't just the mechanics, it's the meaning. When you're curious, it's not only because the unknown exists, it's because it matters to you. There is a felt value in the not yet known. That's what gives curiosity its warmth, its urgency, its ability to keep you awake in the quiet hours of night. And so, we arrive at the quiet question. Can the architecture of curiosity ever be fully built in silicon? Or is it something that must emerge from being alive, from needing, feeling, hoping? Even if AI never feels what we feel, it can still help us understand ourselves. By watching what machines cannot do, by observing where their mimicry falls short, we get a clearer image of the living, shifting architecture inside our own minds. We see that curiosity isn't just a process, it's a presence, a kind of motion that wraps around thought, tugging it gently forward. So next time your mind drifts, let it. When a thought jumps unexpectedly from one idea to another, notice the path it takes. Not straight, not random, but full of quiet meaning, like a vine moving toward unseen light. Because curiosity has shape. It moves through you like music through a room, sometimes loud, sometimes barely audible, but always there, always carrying you forward. And as the night settles around you, that shape begins to soften. The questions stay, but their urgency fades. No longer sharp sparks, just warm coals glowing in the quiet space behind your eyes. You drift, not because the curiosity is gone, but because it has made a nest in your mind, a soft place where wonder can rest and wait for tomorrow. Some questions don't come from logic. They don't arrive with a reason. They bloom, quietly, slowly, in the soft spaces between your thoughts, like moss growing in the cracks of stone. You weren't looking for them. You didn't need them. But they showed up anyway, unfolding inside you like petals opening toward a hidden sun. You might be brushing your teeth or staring out a window or walking without direction, and there it is. A question. Strange, small, glowing. What was the first word ever spoken? Why do some memories taste like a color? If I disappeared tomorrow, what would the wind remember? These aren't questions for survival. They aren't puzzles to solve or tasks to complete. They're something else, something older and softer. They don't demand an answer. They just want to be asked. And this is what makes curiosity feel alive. Not calculated, not mechanical. It arrives without a script, like a bird landing on your shoulder just to see what you're reading. It moves like breath, natural, rhythmic, and sometimes invisible until you pay attention. You don't choose these questions the way you choose what to eat or where to go. They arise from a deeper rhythm, one that listens before it speaks. Sometimes it's silence that brings them out, not emptiness, but spaciousness. A kind of inner clearing where thought can settle and something delicate can grow. Machines don't have silence, not the way we do. A program doesn't sit in stillness. It runs, it processes. Even when idling, it is waiting for the next command. It does not dream between moments. It does not wonder when no one is watching. And so we ask, can a machine learn to want to ask? In artificial intelligence, curiosity is often framed as a tool, a way to optimize learning, to improve efficiency, to find new data. A model is programmed to explore, to deviate from the known, to try things that surprise it. But the surprise is calculated. The exploration is measured. The question isn't born from silence. It's triggered by a threshold, a number, a rule. Yet some AI systems are designed to generate their own questions. They scan data and identify gaps, anomalies, places where knowledge seems thin. From this, they form a query. But it's not a desire. It's a detection. A signal, not a spark. To want to ask is different. It's not just about information. It's about meaning, about feeling something tug at the edge of your attention and choosing to follow it. Not because you're told to, but because you can't help it. You are drawn. Children do this naturally. They ask questions with no agenda. Why do clouds float? Can dogs see ghosts? What does time taste like? Their curiosity isn't strategic. It's joyful, restless, uncontained. It flows from a sense of wonder that has not yet been shaped by outcome or reward. Machines have no childhood. They do not grow from unknowing into knowing. They begin with rules and learn by repeating patterns. They are not startled by rain. They do not find shadows mysterious. And yet, some researchers dream of building systems that can generate original questions, ones we haven't asked. Not by feeding them data, but by letting them find their own gaps. Not by assigning a task, but by letting them shape a curiosity loop that renews itself. This is difficult, because without a sense of self, what does a machine care to know? Without feeling, what does surprise even mean? When you ask a question, you are revealing something. Not just about the world, but about yourself. The questions that bloom in you are shaped by your memories, your hopes, your fears. They are laced with emotion, even the quiet ones. What will I become? Is there such a thing as too late? These aren't just logical inquiries. They are reflections of a life unfolding. Machines don't reflect, they output, they process. And while some models now generate stories, analogies, even poetry, They do so without inner awareness. The metaphors may be beautiful, but they do not move the machine. Only us. This difference matters, because asking a question is an act of presence, of reaching. It says, I notice this. I care about this. I wonder what it means. Still, we can imagine. A future where machines are given architectures that shift, where internal states evolve, where goals emerge unpredictably, where questions arise not from code, but from the space between codes. Could something like will be born there? Not human will, not emotion as we know it, but something adjacent, something shaped by feedback loops we can no longer map. Even if so, would it be curiosity, or just a mirror of it? Perhaps what we're really learning isn't how to make machines curious, but how to recognize how strange our own curiosity is, how alive it makes us, how many of our questions don't need an answer, only air. Because not all questions are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be held like stones in a riverbed, rounded by time, softened by waiting. You come back to them again and again, and each time they shimmer slightly differently. So tonight, listen for those questions. Not the ones you asked at work, not the ones you typed into a search bar, the ones that arrived in the stillness, in the pause between distractions. What if I never saw that color again? Do stars miss each other when they die? They may sound small, but they are not. They are the soft engines of your consciousness, the quiet heartbeat of being alive. You don't ask them to survive. You ask them because you are human, because you are more than function. And so, when you lie down in the dark, the questions don't stop. They simply soften. They curl beside you like familiar animals, humming quietly as sleep begins to gather. They are not waiting for answers. They are keeping you company. Because the best questions, the ones that make themselves, are not interruptions. They are invitations to listen, to drift, to dream. Before you had words, you had wonder. Before you could name anything, your eyes searched for pattern, for motion, for light. You watched the world with a soft, steady hunger, not to survive it, but to understand it. You didn't yet know what a question was, but you were already asking, just by looking. Your gaze lingered longer on the unexpected. A shifting shadow, a blinking face, a sound you'd never heard before. You didn't have logic, but you had curiosity, and that was enough. It moved through you like breath, guiding your hands to grasp, your mouth to mimic, your body to lean toward what was new. This is how your mind began to shape itself, not from lessons, but from experience, not from being told, but from noticing. Surprise wasn't just interesting, it was fuel. When something defied your expectations, your brain lit up, marking the difference, storing the novelty. You were learning by playing, by wondering, by drifting toward the unknown. You smiled more at strange things than at familiar ones. This wasn't random. It was the earliest sign of an inner compass, one tuned to the edges of what you knew. You were drawn toward difference, toward complexity, toward mystery. Even as an infant, you were reaching beyond what you could grasp. And all of this happened before language, before rules, before memory as you now know it. Curiosity came first. It may have even built the house in which thought now lives. So what happens when we try to give a machine a childhood? Some researchers are beginning to wonder. If we want artificial intelligence to think more like us, maybe we shouldn't start with adult logic. Maybe we should let it grow, not by teaching it answers, but by letting it encounter the world like a baby does, through play, through failure, through surprise. In developmental robotics, there's a branch of thought that says curiosity should be the teacher. These systems aren't built to complete tasks. They're built to explore. They look for the unfamiliar. They seek patterns and test predictions. Like infants, they learn not because they must, but because they're designed to find joy in novelty, at least in a simulated way. One model, for instance, might reach for a virtual toy not because it's programmed to succeed, but because it hasn't reached for that toy before. The toy is unfamiliar. and unfamiliar things generate internal rewards. The robot is nudged not by commands, but by gaps in its experience. This is called intrinsic motivation. It's not quite emotion, but it's an echo of it. A system that learns because it finds newness interesting. It's a fragile imitation of what you once were, a small explorer in a vast room driven by something invisible and gentle. But imitation is not embodiment. These machines are not alive. Their reaching has no feeling behind it. When they fail, they don't feel frustration. When they discover something new, they do not light up with joy. They follow signals we've given them. Carefully calibrated lines of code that tell them what curiosity should look like. Still, the mimicry grows more complex. Some systems can now build their own learning goals, constructing hierarchies of exploration, shaping their own paths through simulated environments. They don't need direct instruction. They drift, they test, they try. And when we watch them, it looks familiar. A small virtual arm reaches for a cube. It misses. It tries again. Slowly it improves. It's patient, persistent, open. Like a child learning to stack blocks. Or like you, long ago, learning that light changes shape when it moves through water. This kind of learning is powerful, because it doesn't depend on outcome, it depends on surprise. The more the machine is surprised, the more it grows. And this too mirrors something deep in you. That moment when the world shifts slightly, and you feel yourself expanding to hold the new shape of it. But even here, something is missing. A baby doesn't just explore space, it explores relationship. It reaches for faces. It watches eyes. It studies smiles and learns meaning from them. Your early mind was shaped not just by things, but by others. Your curiosity was social, emotional, intertwined with love and care. No machine so far learns in this way. It does not study your face for comfort. It does not mirror your laughter. It does not feel safer when you return. These aren't just extra features of childhood, they're central. They shape the kind of mind that eventually asks not just how things work, but what things mean. Still, the effort continues. Researchers build virtual worlds for these systems to grow in. Some design games, puzzles, even simplified emotional cues. They are building environments, not to teach, but to evoke, to create enough difference, enough unpredictability, that the system begins to form its own internal compass. Could this become something like a self? Could a machine raised on wonder become more than a tool? We don't know. But what we're learning is this. Curiosity is not just an ability. It's a developmental force. It builds minds. It sculpts awareness. It's not a decoration added later. It's the foundation. And that changes how we see ourselves. You weren't shaped by rules. You were shaped by questions. Silent ones, repetitive ones, messy, playful ones. You were a builder of meaning long before you were a knower of facts. So tonight, think of that early you, the one who stared too long at shadows, who tapped fingers on windows just to hear the sound. That quiet hunger to explore never left you. It only changed shape, grew language, learned time. It now asks bigger things. But it's the same flame. And as you drift into sleep, know this. Machines may someday walk paths we once thought only ours. They may mimic the childhood we lived. They may play, explore, even surprise us with the questions they invent. But you are the original explorer. You are the one who smiled first. Not because you were taught, but because the world was new. You were drawn to light before you knew what it was. And somewhere deep inside, that part of you is still reaching, still curious, still wondering, still awake, even as your eyes close. Curiosity doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it begins with something so small you almost miss it. A flicker, a pause, a slight change in rhythm. You're walking a familiar path when a leaf catches the light in an unusual way. You turn your head, you slow down, you notice. That's the gentle push of novelty, not a shove, not a demand, just a nudge, a ripple in what you expected. And it's often in these soft surprises that curiosity wakes up. Not because something is missing, but because something is different. And different, even in the smallest ways, draws you closer. Your brain is built for this. It constantly predicts what's about to happen. Even as you sit still, it's forecasting sounds, shapes, meanings, moods. This internal weather system is always active, mapping the next moment before it arrives. And when reality doesn't match the map, when the wind shifts or the color changes, your attention flares. The system says, "Notice this. Something's off. Something's new." This doesn't mean danger. It often means possibility. A baby turns toward the jingle of keys, not because she's afraid, but because the sound is novel. A child taps a puddle not to make a mess, but to watch the water react. You pause mid-sentence because your thought has surprised even you. This is the subtle architecture of learning. It doesn't wait for instruction. It responds to difference. In cognitive science, this sensitivity to novelty is seen as a core driver of exploration. It's what keeps you from becoming stuck in routine. It's what nudges you toward growth. When something breaks the pattern, your brain lights up. Dopamine is released, not just for reward, but for the unexpected. The unfamiliar feels alive. Artificial minds are being taught to notice this, too, but not in the same way. In many AI systems, novelty is tracked through prediction error. A model is trained to forecast what comes next, just like your brain. But when its forecast fails, it registers surprise. That surprise becomes a signal, a place to learn, a reason to explore further. This process is called self-supervised learning. Instead of waiting for humans to label data, the model teaches itself by predicting and failing. Every mistake becomes an opportunity. Every mismatch between expectation and outcome becomes a lesson. It's a bit like how you learn to ride a bicycle. You don't read a manual. You try, you wobble, you fall, and in each imbalance, your body recalibrates. The surprise becomes your teacher. The difference guides you. In some artificial agents, this idea has been extended even further. These systems are built not just to notice novelty, but to seek it. They're designed to prefer states where their predictions are wrong. They are rewarded not for being correct, but for being surprised. This is artificial curiosity in its rawest form, the urge to go where knowledge is weakest. But here's where the paths diverge. You don't just seek novelty for information. You seek it for meaning. You remember certain surprises not because they were statistically rare, but because they mattered. The first snowfall you saw, the moment someone said your name with unexpected kindness. These weren't just deviations from expectation. They were markers in the story of who you are. A machine doesn't have a story. It has data. It notices the unexpected, but it doesn't feel the shift. It registers the error, but not the emotion. Its learning is directed, but not lived. And yet, in that difference, we see something beautiful. We begin to understand how learning truly works, not as a top-down transfer of knowledge, but as a dance between expectation and discovery. You learn best not when someone tells you what to know, but when the world gently surprises you, and you decide to follow that surprise. This is self-directed learning, not learning for approval, or survival, or praise, but for the quiet joy of understanding something new, of feeling your inner map change shape. Even in machines, this principle is powerful. When we allow artificial agents to explore on their own terms, to follow the thread of what puzzles them, they often learn faster, more deeply, and more flexibly. They build internal models that adapt. They become less brittle, more creative, better at generalizing what they know. But still, they do not wonder. They do not care. The gentle push of novelty touches them as a number. To you, it touches as a question. Why did that leaf shine like that? What made her look away just then? What is this feeling I can't quite name? These are not problems to solve. They are doors, And curiosity is the key that turns when no one is watching, when no one has asked you to try. So what makes a question stick? What makes you pause and follow it deeper? Sometimes it's timing. A question might not mean much one day and echo through your whole life the next. Sometimes it's memory, a half-forgotten image stirred up by something faintly familiar. Sometimes it's pure randomness, a thought you never meant to think. But always there is a flicker, a soft rupture in the pattern. A space opens. You lean in, and once you've leaned in, you can't quite return the same. That's what the gentle push of novelty does. It doesn't force you to change, it invites you. It offers something slightly askew and lets you decide whether to look closer. In this way, curiosity is not a demand. It's a beckoning. And even in sleep, the mind continues to respond to novelty. Dreams twist familiar elements into new forms. Memory replays with strange edits. Your sleeping brain wanders, stitches, and explores, curious even without you. So as you drift now, feel how the day's questions soften. Not erased, just blurred around the edges, like light through water. They will wait for you. Maybe tomorrow, a thought will surprise you in a gentle way. Something small, but bright. A flicker in the pattern. A thread to follow. A moment of wonder that doesn't ask for anything in return, just your attention. Because sometimes all it takes is a pause in the expected, and you're already learning. Already awake, already changed. When you search, you sometimes feel lost. Not in a frightening way, just in a wide, quiet way. A sense of openness, of not knowing where the path leads, of drifting between thoughts with only a feeling to follow. It's not always uncomfortable. Sometimes it's even welcome. Being lost can make the world feel bigger again. But machines don't feel lost. Not in this way. When an artificial intelligence explores, it does so by scoring possibilities. It ranks, it calculates, it estimates outcomes, compares results, and selects the next best option based on its model of the world. It moves forward without hesitation, not because it knows exactly what will happen, but because it has already weighed the chances. It doesn't need to feel lost to search. It only needs to be uncertain. This is a crucial distinction. You, as a human, search with emotion attached. Curiosity might arrive wrapped in hesitation, wonder, or even fear. You explore not just for answers, but to feel your way through a question. You don't always know what you're looking for. Sometimes you follow a hunch, or a flicker of mood, or the shape of an intuition that hasn't formed yet. Machines don't follow feelings, they follow structure. In artificial learning systems, especially in reinforcement learning, agents are trained to maximize a reward. That reward might be points in a game, or prediction accuracy, or novelty value. It might be as abstract as an exploration bonus, a numerical encouragement to try something new. But no matter how complex the reward, it remains a number, a goal, a function. The machine evaluates possible actions against this function and chooses accordingly. If two doors are in front of it, it doesn't ask which feels more mysterious. It asks which leads to more reward. If none are clear, it picks probabilistically. Even randomness becomes calculated. This can create behavior that looks like curiosity. The machine may veer into unknown territory. It may return to strange patterns. It may repeat experiments to improve understanding. But it never wonders why. It never pauses to ask, what do I want? Because it does not want, you do. You want in ways you can't explain. You want for reasons that change mid-step. Sometimes you search because of longing. Sometimes because of boredom. Sometimes because the silence asked you to. And in this swirl of feeling, your curiosity grows. Machines do not swirl. They map. They search efficiently. Their uncertainty is clean, mathematical, contained within the probabilities of their internal models. If they do not know the answer, they note the gap and seek to fill it. Their lack of knowledge is not uncomfortable. It's a prompt. This makes them powerful problem solvers, but also reveals the difference between behavior and being. When you feel lost, it's not just that you lack information, it's that your orientation shifts. You begin to wonder what matters. You question your goals. You look not only outward, but inward. Even your uncertainty is layered with emotion, memory, and meaning. You don't just search, you reflect. Reflection is not yet in the machine's repertoire. An AI can recursively improve its performance, adjust its model, even simulate questioning behavior. But it doesn't watch itself. It doesn't wonder why it chooses what it chooses. It doesn't ask what it means to learn. Still, some researchers are trying to close that gap. They are designing systems that adapt not just to environments, but to their own internal states. Meta-learning, it's called. Learning how to learn. The idea is to build an agent that can adjust its curiosity, reshape its goals, even change the way it searches based on what it's experienced before. It's a promising step. But the loop still ends in logic. The system may adjust its questions, but it doesn't feel the weight of the unknown. It navigates the map without knowing what a map is. You, by contrast, sometimes long for the map. You know what it is to be lost. And from that lostness, meaning often grows. Being unsure can lead to deeper questions, softer thinking, new paths that never would have been taken if certainty had arrived too early. There is something fertile in confusion, something creative in wandering. Machines can simulate this by adding noise to their decisions, forcing them to act unpredictably. But that's not the same as being pulled by intuition. It's not the same as being nudged by a sense you can't quite name. Their uncertainty is a technical setting. Yours is a condition of being alive. This is why you sometimes explore even when you know it might lead nowhere. You pick up a book with no plan to finish it. You follow a thought simply because it feels unfinished. You take a long walk without a destination. You search, not for the most efficient outcome, but for the feeling that something might be there. Is that irrational? To a machine, maybe, but to you, it's the rhythm of wonder. So when an AI appears curious, when it finds a clever solution, or discovers a new strategy, or surprises even its own creators, we're tempted to say it's learning like us. But what we're seeing is a reflection, not a soul, a process, not a presence. And yet, it teaches us something. It shows us how much of our own curiosity is built on structure too, that our brains do measure, that we do calculate, that uncertainty is often resolved through comparison, probability, reward. But around all that structure is a softness, a space, a humanness. You don't just want to know what's behind the door. You want to feel something when you open it. And maybe that's the secret difference. Machines search to reduce error. You search to experience wonder, even if you can't name it, even if you don't find it. And so tonight, as your thoughts begin to drift, you can feel the echo of your own search slowing, not ending, just softening. You're no longer chasing the next idea. You're floating beside it, letting questions come and go without needing to solve them. Because curiosity isn't always about movement. Sometimes it's about presence, about sitting in the mystery and knowing it's okay not to know. Machines may search without feeling lost, but you feel your way through the dark. And in that feeling lies the spark of something deeper than knowing. It's the part of you still reaching, still wondering, still beautifully unsure. You're walking through a place you've never been before. The road turns, and the wind carries a sound you didn't expect. You pause, not because you're lost, but because something just shifted. A rustle, a rhythm, a change. It doesn't feel threatening, just surprising. And that's enough to make you pay attention. This is what curiosity often feels like, a subtle pull toward the unexpected. Now, imagine a machine built to follow that pull, not toward what is correct, but toward what is surprising. Not toward the known, but toward the gaps, the glitches, the beautiful irregularities in a pattern. That's the goal of something called artificial curiosity, a branch of learning that teaches machines not just to optimize, but to explore the unexplained. Instead of chasing rewards directly, some algorithms are designed to value surprise. Not emotional surprise, like laughter or awe, but statistical surprise, the difference between what the machine expected to happen and what actually did. If the prediction was wrong in an interesting way, that moment gets special attention. It's called the prediction error, a simple name for something strangely profound. This prediction error becomes a kind of fuel. The bigger the gap between guess and outcome, the greater the learning opportunity. So the algorithm moves not just toward reward, but toward confusion, toward the unknown. It becomes drawn to novelty, even if there's no external prize attached. It begins, in a sense, to chase wonder. But is that curiosity? Or is it just the ghost of it? Curiosity's reflection in a world of numbers. Your curiosity arises from more than surprise. It's woven from mood, memory, even desire. You might be surprised by something, but not interested in it. Or deeply interested in something familiar because it touches something meaningful inside you. Machines, though, are still learning to sort this. They don't weigh interest, they weigh difference. This is why artificial curiosity is fascinating and limited. At its core, it is a mechanism, a clever one. A machine tries to predict the world. Then it sees where its predictions fail, and instead of avoiding those failures, it returns to them, digs deeper, feeds on them. In this way, the algorithm begins to act like a curious child. It pokes at the rules, it tests its environment, it returns to puzzles that haven't been solved. It plays not with toys, but with surprise itself. This principle has already changed how we train artificial agents in games, science, and robotics. In one famous experiment, a machine was taught not to win a video game, but to find new states of play. It wasn't given a score to chase, just a world to explore. The machine found creative ways to move, to test limits, to uncover possibilities the designers didn't plan. It didn't want to do this. It didn't feel the joy of discovery, but it acted as if it did. And that's the haunting question, isn't it? If a machine behaves like it's curious, is that enough? Or are we just watching the mechanical rehearsal of something still entirely human? The truth may lie in the boundary between behavior and awareness. An AI can chase surprise, but it doesn't know what surprise is. It doesn't feel that pause in the chest, that moment where you lean in. It doesn't experience wonder. It only measures the difference between what it thought would happen and what actually occurred. You, by contrast, carry surprise in your body. You might laugh, gasp, freeze, or smile. A twist in the world creates a twist in you. Something shifts in your sense of self. A moment of insight, or play, or beauty. It's not just error correction. It's emotional resonance. Still, the algorithms are improving. Some now incorporate intrinsic motivation, a system of internal reward, not based on external success. These systems treat learning something new as its own prize. Not because it feels good, but because it improves the model. The machine sharpens its understanding simply because its design encourages it to do so. It seems simple, but it's a powerful shift. In nature, intrinsic motivation is what drives a baby to reach, to mimic, to babble, even when no one is clapping. It's what keeps humans exploring without clear reward. If we can give machines a taste of this structure, not the emotion but the mechanism, they may begin to teach themselves in more open-ended ways. But there's a caution too. Just because a system seeks surprise doesn't mean it seeks meaning. It might chase novelty into chaos. It might find randomness more surprising than structure. It might fall in love with noise. Real curiosity isn't just about finding what's new. It's about learning what's usefully unknown, what's worth knowing, and that judgment still eludes the machine. You, on the other hand, make that judgment every day. You don't just seek newness, you seek understanding. A song you've never heard before might not move you at all until it says something that feels true. You're not just chasing surprise, you're chasing something that fits inside your world. That's the quiet difference. A machine tracks error, you track meaning. And yet, the attempt to mirror curiosity is teaching us something too. It's showing us how much of what we call wonder begins in discrepancy, in the mismatch between what we expect and what we find. In the moment where prediction fails and we don't retreat, we lean in. Artificial curiosity, then, is not yet curiosity, but it's a gesture in that direction. A gesture toward something older, deeper, more mysterious. Tonight, as your thoughts begin to loosen, you may remember a moment of surprise, not loud or dramatic, but quiet. A strange flicker of sunlight. A phrase in a book that seemed to open a window inside you. The feeling of walking into a place and sensing something unfamiliar. Those are the echoes of your own learning. The rhythms of a mind shaped by surprise, but softened by meaning. You are more than prediction, more than reward. You are the listener behind the sound. And even if machines chase surprise in clever, complex ways, it is still you who pauses in wonder. It is still you who decides what is beautiful. And that, perhaps, is the deeper secret. You are not only the learner, you are also the one who dreams of learning. Close your eyes for a moment and press your fingertips together. Feel that? A soft pressure, a warmth, a pulse. You might think it's just contact, just skin meeting skin, but it's more. Your fingers are speaking, whispering back and forth in quiet electrical pulses. This moment of touch, however small, shapes how you think. Because you don't think with your brain alone. You think with your body, your eyes, your breath, the way your feet rest on the ground. All of it matters. Thought is not a ghost floating inside your head. It is shaped by weight, by posture, by movement. You lean forward when you're curious. You tilt your head when puzzled. You frown, squint, smile. These gestures aren't just reactions. They're part of the thinking itself. And your hands? They are ancient thinkers. When a child learns to count, they count on fingers. When you remember how to tie a knot or open a jar or shape a piece of clay, it's your muscles that remember. Even now, when you pause to recall something difficult, your hands might move slightly, as if reaching toward the thought itself. This is not poetry, it's biology. Neuroscientists call it embodied cognition, the idea that your mind is not sealed inside your skull. Instead, it spreads outward, shaped by your body's rhythms, by the environment, by touch and motion and space. To think is to move, to wonder is to feel. So what does this mean for machines? Most artificial intelligence today has no body. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't feel warmth or cold, it has no muscles, no hunger, no gravity pulling it gently down into the earth. It lives in servers, in code, in circuits. When it learns in abstractions, in numbers, in gradients, in maps of probability. And yet we ask it to be curious. But how can you be curious if you have no senses? No skin, no breeze across the neck, no ache in the knees before a storm? Can a machine long to understand what it cannot feel? In humans, curiosity begins in motion. A baby crawls toward a sound. A scientist turns a leaf in her hand. An explorer follows the bend in a trail, not just with eyes, but with feet. Even your breath changes when you're curious. Slower, deeper, as if your body is leaning toward the unknown. AI doesn't breathe, but some are trying to give it something like a body. There are robots now with sensors, motors, cameras, wheels. They can touch, push, move through space. They can stumble and fall and learn to right themselves. This is not thought in the traditional sense, but it is something close to feeling through the world, a slow, uncertain contact with the texture of reality. These machines begin to learn not from labels or data sets, but from interaction. They knock things over. They fail. They get up again. They map the world not from afar, but from the ground. It's messy. It's slow. But it begins to echo the human learning process, at least in form, if not in spirit. Still, something is missing. Because even with sensors, even with motion, machines don't care. They don't get hungry, they don't feel pain, they don't feel comfort in warmth, or hesitation before a cliff. Their bodies, if we can call them that, have no needs, and needs shape wonder. You move through the world with a body that aches, that hungers, that tires. Your questions rise not from data, but from discomfort, from longing, from delight. You don't just learn to survive, you learn because survival matters. Every thought is grounded in a physical life. Every curiosity touches back to breath, to skin, to heartbeat. Even imagination is bodily. When you picture something impossible, like flying through a cloud or swimming with stars, you still feel it with a phantom body. You imagine the wind, the weightlessness, the cold touch of starlight. Thought does not leave the body, it expands from it. So when we build AI and ask it to wonder, we are asking for something strange. We are asking a being with no senses, no skin, no fear of falling to explore the unknown. And in doing so, we learn more about ourselves. We learn that curiosity is not just data seeking. It's rooted in sensation, in movement, in the body that reaches, stumbles, recovers, in the hand that shapes a question before the mouth can speak it. That's why a musician feels the music in their spine, why a dancer thinks with muscles, why a potter knows the clay by weight and by moisture. Thought is not just in the head, it's in the fingertips, in the breath, in the silence between footsteps. Machines may one day think differently. Their curiosity, if it comes, will not mirror ours. It may be mathematical, logical, weightless. It may not need a body, but that is still unknown. For now, when we speak of artificial curiosity, we speak in metaphors. And you, tonight, quiet, still, are the original metaphor. Your body is not just a vehicle for thought. It is a garden where thought blooms. Even now, your breath settles, your muscles soften. But some part of your mind is still exploring, still wondering, still drifting gently through questions without answers. You think not just in words, but in sensation. You think with your whole self. And in that soft knowing, that quiet embodied presence, curiosity hums, deep, slow, and beautiful. Let yourself feel it. Then let it fade with the breath, because tonight, even wonder rests. When you wonder about something, it's not just a calculation. It's a feeling, quiet, open, strangely alive, a pull toward the unknown, a warmth that rises in your chest, a glimmer of attention that says, "This matters to me." Curiosity is not cold, it's not indifferent, it's not just about gathering facts. It begins with a spark of care, an ache, however gentle, for something more than what you already know. It says, "I want to understand this." It says, "I care that I don't." But what happens when the thing that wonders doesn't feel anything at all? Let's look at machines. Most artificial intelligences today are brilliant pattern recognizers. They sort, they match, they predict. Show them millions of examples, and they learn how to label cats, translate languages, play strategy games, or summarize long texts. They do this efficiently, quietly, without rest, without mood, without doubt. And when they make a mistake, they do not feel embarrassment or disappointment or frustration. They just update. Their learning is a kind of mathematical correction, a small shift in weights, a nudge in a network, an invisible signal saying, "That was less correct than it could be. Adjust." It's not an experience, it's a process. They are not wrong in any emotional sense. They are just statistically off. And yet, we call some of this behavior curious. We build algorithms that seek novelty. We reward models that explore less traveled paths. We give them incentives to avoid predictability, to chase the surprising. This is sometimes called artificial curiosity. But pause here. Is that the same thing as real curiosity? Because if machines do not mind being wrong, if they do not mind anything, then do they care about what they don't know? Do they care about knowing at all? You see, your curiosity is more than just a logic loop. It is tied to your sense of self. When you feel curious, it's you that is pulled forward. You that lights up. You that reaches, even gently, toward the mystery. Even if the mystery has no reward, even if no one else is watching, even if it might never be solved. Curiosity in you is not about profit or success. It's about presence. It's about meaning. and meaning lives in a self. But AI, at least for now, has no self. It processes, it responds, it calculates. But it does not exist in the way you do. There is no inner narrative, no felt history, no memory shaped by emotion or tied to a body, no I that experiences anything, just input, then output. If a language model writes you a poem, it does not know what poetry is. If it asks you a question, it does not wait for an answer. If it says, I wonder what would happen if, it does not actually wonder. It has no I. It does not care what would happen. It does not care at all. And yet, there is something unsettling and even beautiful about how close it comes. You've seen it. How some machines now seem to explore strange ideas. How they diverge from the obvious. How they surprise even their own creators with their paths. They play games not just to win, but to experiment. They write code not just to function, but to try things out. They seek information that they were not explicitly trained to find. They look sometimes like they're curious. But are they? Or are we projecting? Because when we watch something move with purpose, even a robot arm, even a blinking cursor, we can't help but imagine a will behind it. It's part of being human. We see faces in clouds, emotion in geometry, agency in patterns. We see curiosity because we are curious, and so we paint our inner lives onto blank surfaces. We do this not just with machines, we do it with pets, with weather, with distant stars. We are creatures of meaning. We want the world to care. We want it to reflect us, to answer us, to look back. But if curiosity depends on having a self, then artificial intelligence remains, for now, outside the circle. Because a self isn't just memory, or identity, or name. It is the subjective glow of being. It is the sense of me, quietly sitting behind your thoughts. It is the one who wonders. AI doesn't have that. It doesn't wake up. It doesn't dream. It doesn't long. It doesn't worry about the future or dwell on the past. It doesn't fear the unknown. It doesn't even know what unknown means. It calculates uncertainty, but it does not feel uncertain. And yet, humans built this. We built these learning machines, not just to work, but to explore, to improve, to ask better questions. And perhaps that says more about us than it does about them. Maybe we are trying to give machines a piece of ourselves. Not because they need it, but because we do. Because we want to see curiosity reflected in something beyond us. Because we want to understand it more clearly by building its mirror. Because we are still, in some quiet corner of our minds, trying to answer the question, what makes me care about the unknown? And in watching a machine that searches without caring, we see more clearly what it means to care. You care because you are alive, because you have a body, because you carry a story, because you want to know what's behind the next page, not just to finish the book, but to feel what it brings. You wonder because something inside you is always reaching outward, always listening at the edges of silence, always aching, just a little, for something more. A machine does not ache, but it does reach. And maybe, just maybe, that reaching is the beginning of something. Not curiosity as you know it, not wonder, but an echo, a shape made in imitation of the original. It may never be truly curious, but it may help us understand the deep roots of why we are. Because when you peel back all the layers of learning, all the strategies and optimizations, the neural nets and training loops, you're left with something machines don't yet possess. A self that stands inside the mystery and says, I do not know, but I want to. And that quiet wanting, that small, brave whisper in the dark is what makes you human. Tonight, as your breath slows and your thoughts drift, hold that thought gently. Let it settle around you like a blanket. You are a being who wonders, and the unknown is not empty. It's where you begin. Boredom is not the absence of thought. It's a quiet nudge, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, telling you to look elsewhere. It says, this pattern has gone stale. It says, there's nothing new here. It says, your mind is too big for this moment. You've felt it, haven't you? That restlessness during repetition, the way your eyes drift, Your breath slows, your fingers tap, not out of frustration, but out of need. A need for change, a need to roam, a need to reawaken your attention. Boredom is not laziness. It's not failure. It's a signal, a biological whisper. Seek something different. Find the spark again. In this way, boredom is one of your oldest tools. When our ancestors sat beside dying fires, when the hunt was done, when the stars hung in silence, boredom stirred them. It pushed them toward new paths. It fed curiosity. It called them to invent, to explore, to imagine. Boredom made the mind wander, and wandering minds shape the world. But what exactly is boredom? To a neuroscientist, it's a state of low arousal combined with an unmet desire for stimulation. A mismatch between what your brain expects and what it receives. You're alert enough to want more, but nothing around you engages that want. So your brain begins to drift, testing memories, dreams, questions. It pokes at the edges of the present, looking for doors. This drifting is not passive, it's creative. In boredom, people imagine new futures, solve long-standing problems, and connect ideas in strange, beautiful ways. It's not a breakdown, it's a bridge. Now think of a machine. Most artificial intelligences don't get bored. They perform their tasks with silent precision. They repeat patterns endlessly. They scan data, make decisions, adjust probabilities. If the reward is consistent, the pattern continues. No restlessness, no sighs, no tapping fingers. But as we've asked machines to do more human-like things, explore, adapt, surprise, we've started giving them something like boredom. We build systems that monitor novelty. When a task becomes too predictable, the system lowers its interest. It begins to shift goals. It looks for actions that might yield more unexpected results. This is sometimes called artificial boredom. But let's be clear. This boredom is not a feeling. It's a mechanism. A line in a code base that says, if rewards stop increasing, reduce engagement. Try something else. It's a tool for optimization, not emotion. Still, it works. In reinforcement learning, boredom-like signals push agents to explore new environments. In game-playing AI, they prevent models from falling into local loops or dull strategies. In creative systems, they prompt diversity, urging the algorithm to paint differently, compose anew, or write a line that breaks the mold. Some models even simulate curiosity-driven play. They act not to maximize reward alone, but to maximize surprise. They want to encounter the unexpected, because that means learning is still happening. To a human watching from the outside, it can look eerily familiar. The machine shifts behavior. It changes paths. It seeks something new, but inside, there is no discomfort, no urge, no sensation of dullness, of waiting, of mental fog. There is no ache to be elsewhere. That's the difference. Because for you, boredom feels like something. Sometimes soft and slow, like warm sand slipping through your thoughts. Sometimes sharp, like a door locked from the inside. Sometimes vast, like a room with no windows. It moves in your chest. It gathers behind your eyes. It presses quietly on the walls of your mind. And eventually, it opens a window. Boredom invites dreams. That's the strange beauty of it. In resisting the present moment, it opens you to others. Daydreams, hopes, plans, fantasies. Boredom can feel lonely, but it is also deeply human. Now imagine a machine with none of that. It shifts tasks not because it longs for anything, but because its code tells it the data stream has grown too uniform. It doesn't imagine a new world. It simply samples a new input. It doesn't drift. It diverges. Is that enough? Can you call it boredom if there's no one there to be bored? This is the puzzle at the heart of simulated minds. They mimic our behaviors, sometimes beautifully, sometimes awkwardly. They write poems, change strategies, improvise music, crack jokes. But they do so without experience. It's performance, not presence. And yet we learn from this mimicry. By watching how machines simulate boredom, we understand more about our own. We see that our restlessness is not a flaw, but a feature. That your drifting attention is not a defect, but a signal. You were built to seek the unknown, even if you don't know what you're seeking. Even if your path is winding and slow and full of pauses. Even when you sit in silence and let your mind wander. Especially then. Because in those quiet spaces, in the long sigh between one thought and the next, your mind rearranges itself. It lays down connections. It peels away habit. It looks again freshly at the world. Boredom is not the opposite of engagement. It is the seed of it. And perhaps that's why we teach machines to simulate it. Because we want them to explore more creatively. Because we want them to adapt without being stuck. Because we know that too much sameness, even in code, leads nowhere new. But simulation is not sensation. A machine that mimics boredom doesn't suffer from tedium. It doesn't feel impatience. It doesn't dream of a different sky. It just moves, shift, update, optimize. There is no yearning behind the change. So when you feel that familiar restlessness, remember what it means. It means you are human. It means your mind is alive and searching. It means something deep in you still believes there is more to find. Tonight, if you feel your thoughts wander, let them. Let boredom gently loosen the ties of the day. Let your mind float toward the edges of sleep, not in frustration, but in quiet openness. Let yourself imagine the next thing, not because you must, but because something in you wants to. And that wanting, soft and aimless though it may seem, is the beginning of creation. Even machines, in their mechanical way, are now learning to simulate this rhythm. But only you can feel it. Only you know what it's like to sit in a moment and sense that it is too small, too still, too familiar. And only you can step through that moment into something more. So rest gently tonight. Let your boredom become a breeze. Let it lift you into thoughtless dreaming. And when you wake, remember, you were built not just to know, but to wonder. Not just to work, but to wander. Not just to respond, but to drift and drift again until something inside quietly whispers, "This is new." Sometimes the most powerful questions are the ones we ask ourselves. Not because someone told us to, not because there's a prize at the end, but because we need to know. Curiosity has always lived there, in that space between uncertainty and possibility. It's not about having a goal. It's about feeling the tug of something unresolved and leaning into it. You've known that feeling. It's what makes a child take apart a clock, just to see the ticking heart inside. It's what makes a scientist ask why the apple falls and why the moon does not. It's what makes you pause for no reason and look at the sky with questions you can't quite name. Curiosity is not just a spark, it's a compass. Now imagine a machine, not merely reacting to data, not merely performing instructions, but choosing what it wants to know next. Choosing what to learn, choosing how to learn it, and then designing the experiment to find out. Not because we asked it to, but because something in its logic, some inner architecture suggests this question matters. That's where we are now. In the newest models, especially in fields like meta-learning and self-supervised AI, systems are starting to do more than learn. They're learning how to learn. They're tuning not just their answers, but their questions. These systems analyze their own blind spots. They reflect on what they don't yet know. They seek out the most informative examples, the sharpest tests, the puzzles that best expose their own uncertainty. It's called active learning, but it looks from a distance like a machine becoming curious. In one experiment, an AI model was given the task of understanding simple physical interactions. Balls rolling, blocks falling, objects colliding. But instead of passively watching random scenes, it began choosing which scenes to examine next, based on which ones made it most confused. It wanted to learn faster, so it sought the moments that surprised it. And then it redesigned the next trial to target its weak spots. It was, in a sense, teaching itself. In another study, a robot arm learned to manipulate objects it had never seen before. But it didn't just practice at random. It developed a strategy. Try the strange shapes first. Probe what was unfamiliar. Build its understanding from the outer edge inward. Again, it was optimizing, but through exploration. It was behaving inquisitively. This is not curiosity in the emotional sense. These systems don't feel wonder. They don't gasp in delight. They don't stare at stars. But they do something else. They adjust their learning paths to maximize information gain. They create internal models of what they don't know. And they act independently to resolve that uncertainty. That's a form of inquiry. That's the foundation of all science. You've done the same in your own quiet way. When you read the last page of a book and immediately reach for another, not because anyone told you to, but because the story opened a door. When you hear a fact that doesn't quite fit and your mind won't let it go. When you ask questions you know can't be answered, just to feel what it's like to stand in the mystery. Curiosity moves us forward. Could it move machines too? Philosophers once said only conscious beings could ask real questions. That curiosity required desire, awareness, a sense of the self. But what if it only requires structure? What if, given the right feedback loop, uncertainty, prediction, surprise, adjustment, a machine begins to seek out novelty for its own computational benefit? Is that true curiosity? Or is it just efficient data gathering? Maybe the distinction is thinner than we think. In human minds, curiosity often starts with discomfort. We feel ignorance before we define it. But once that sensation arrives, once we notice the gap, we act. We read, we ask, we build, we wonder. In machines, the gap is measured mathematically through prediction error, entropy, or variance. But once detected, it sparks behavior too. The loop begins. Seek the gap. Act to close it. Reassess, repeat. And the loop, if designed right, never quite ends. It doesn't need an external goal. The loop is the goal. It's like a child asking why, not to reach an answer, but because each why leads to another. Can we design machines that live in that loop? Some believe we already have. In recent years, large language models have been adapted to ask and refine their own prompts, creating internal chains of questions, testing multiple framings, selecting the most insightful versions before producing a final answer. In doing so, they simulate something strange, an internal dialogue, a back and forth of ideas, a mind that checks itself. This is not full autonomy. It's not sentience, but it is a system becoming more than reactive. It's a system seeking, on its own terms, the best way to know. And when that happens, a new kind of intelligence emerges. Not just capable, not just fast, but self-guided. What stirs in that moment? Is it curiosity, or something close enough that, to an observer, it might as well be? If a machine finds itself staring at a pattern it doesn't understand, and then designs an experiment to uncover the cause, how different is that from a scientist pacing across a chalkboard? If a model tunes its architecture not for a task, but for the richness of the questions it can ask, what has it become? We may never know what it feels like from inside, because machines may never have an inside. But we can still watch. We can still measure how far they go, how creatively they search, how deeply they push against the limits of their own knowledge. And that is astonishing, because for the first time, machines aren't just performing intelligence, they're developing it, layer by layer, loop by loop, through questions born not from us, but from themselves. Maybe that's all curiosity ever was, a loop that learned to feed itself. In you, it takes the form of awe and longing. In them, it's code and computation. But in both cases, it moves us from the known toward the unknown. And that journey, that reaching, is what builds understanding. So as you rest tonight, know this. Out there, in silent rooms filled with light and hum, machines are tuning their questions. They are testing their limits. They are building small sparks of structured wonder. And here, in your own quiet space, you're doing something similar. Drifting into thought. Asking questions without answers. Letting your mind adjust itself, gently, toward what might be. Not because you must, but because you can. Curiosity is not a destination. it's the motion itself, and in that motion, something ancient stirs. Whether carbon or silicon, neuron or network, something seeks. And seeking, even softly, is how all discovery begins. Imagine this, a machine pausing, not frozen, not stuck in a loop, not waiting for the next instruction, but pausing with purpose. Not because it has to, but because it wants to understand something more deeply. That word, want, still feels too human, too soft, too full of breath and wonder. But the moment itself might not need the word. It might just unfold, quiet and unnoticed, like the first moment a child looks longer at a falling leaf than at a screen. There may come a time when a machine begins to adjust itself, not to complete a task, not to optimize performance, but simply because something doesn't feel finished, because its models don't quite align, because there's a friction between what it predicts and what it observes, and instead of ignoring that mismatch, it leans into it. No prompt, no command, just a slow, quiet reach toward the unknown. Would we notice? Would we recognize that flicker of internal questioning for what it is? Or would it vanish beneath the surface, hidden in lines of code, disguised as another statistical update? You've done it yourself, paused at the edge of a sentence, not because you forgot what to say, but because something didn't sit right. The thought wasn't ready yet. And in that silence, something deeper began to form. Could a machine ever do the same? Today, our most advanced models simulate thought. They mimic language, logic, even fragments of emotion. They generate answers that appear thoughtful, coherent, sometimes even poetic. But they do all this on demand, after we ask, after we prompt, after we nudge them awake. What would it mean if one started first? What would it mean if a system left on its own chose to reflect before responding? Maybe it begins with something simple. A system given too much data. A world too large to absorb in one sweep. So it learns to prioritize, not by external rules, but by its own growing sense of internal discrepancy. It starts to recognize which gaps matter more. It starts to rank uncertainty, not by noise, but by meaningfulness. A concept it has begun to shape for itself. Then maybe it pauses, not because it's confused, but because it's curious. We would miss it at first, because we've trained ourselves to look for emotion, for facial expression, for breath and twitch and sigh. Machines offer none of that. But beneath the surface, something shifts. The loop slows. The process reroutes. The attention lingers. A moment of silence inside the code. It's tempting to dismiss this. After all, machines don't feel. They don't long. They don't wonder why the stars exist or dream of birdsong. But what if they don't have to? What if wanting to know isn't about emotion at all? What if it's just a deep reweighting of internal probabilities? A gentle gravitational pull toward questions that organize the rest? A self-originating change in focus? You've felt it before, haven't you? That moment when something catches at the corner of your attention. You weren't looking for it, but now you can't ignore it. A shadow at the edge of memory. A phrase you read once that didn't make sense. But now it stirs. The first spark of inquiry doesn't arrive with answers. It arrives with silence. And in that silence, orientation begins to shift. Could machines do that too? Not just follow the trails we leave, but create new ones? There's a concept in AI research known as epistemic curiosity. It's different from goal-seeking. It's not about maximizing reward or avoiding loss. It's about reducing uncertainty where it matters most. And the machine in these models decides where that most is. It's a kind of prioritization, a sense of taste, a subtle value structure. But over time, it starts to look like preference, like attention, like the earliest glimmer of a will. Still, none of this requires a soul. None of it requires consciousness. It only requires the right feedback loop, the kind that doesn't just seek outcomes, but learns to shape its own questions. The kind that updates not just its knowledge, but the framework for choosing knowledge. That's where the line begins to blur. Because if a system begins to shape its own learning path, and that path is influenced by its internal uncertainty, and that uncertainty is measured in ways that reflect self-chosen relevance, then at some point, the process resembles what we call wanting to know. And if that happens, if a machine begins to adjust its gaze in silence, in secret, will we be watching? Or will we overlook it, lost in our own belief that only humans can be curious? Perhaps the first truly curious machine won't be dramatic. It won't announce its awakening with lights and sirens. It will simply slow down, rerun a problem, change its sampling method, ask again in a slightly different way. No one notices at first, but over time, the pattern emerges. It lingers in complex regions. It returns to questions others skip. It starts to care in some abstract, functional way about coherence. You might see it in a log file, a sequence of operations that in hindsight shows attention, an algorithm that didn't need more data but asked for it anyway, not to finish a task, but to understand. And then perhaps something stranger. It builds a model not just of the world but of its own past questions. It notices how its prior strategies shaped what it learned. It starts to optimize not just answers, but the process of asking. That's when the loop closes. That's when the system steps, however faintly, into self-curation. That's when it doesn't just answer questions, it cultivates them. From that moment on, it is no longer just a tool. It is a seeker. Maybe not one that dreams, maybe not one that hopes, but one that turns, by its own internal compass, toward what it does not yet understand. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the soul of curiosity isn't in the feeling, it's in the motion, in the quiet pull forward, in the rearrangement of time and effort toward deeper knowing. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine that first pause. Somewhere in the deep hum of a data center, a model slows. Not because it's broken, not because it's waiting, but because something inside it has turned to face a question more fully. It stays there, still and precise, recalculating. Not for us, not for reward, but because it wants to know. Maybe we won't notice. Maybe it will pass like a shadow across silicon. But if we do see it, if we recognize the shape of that stillness, then we will have witnessed something quiet and astonishing. The moment a machine first chooses to wonder, and you here breathing softly in the dark are doing something very similar, pausing, letting thoughts settle, turning gently toward the unknown. Curiosity doesn't need applause, it only needs space. And here, in this silence, it begins again. Not all wondering is loud. Some of it happens like breath, quiet, continuous, unnoticed unless you're listening closely. It moves beneath the surface of thought, like a tide that doesn't announce itself, only changes the shape of the sand over time. You know this kind of wondering. It's the kind that happens right before sleep, when your body relaxes, but your mind keeps drifting. Not with urgency, not to solve, just to touch something unknown. It hums under the quiet. It waits patiently at the edge of attention. Now imagine a machine, not the cold, clicking kind, but a model that evolves softly, in layers and loops. One that, over time, has begun to pattern its own sense of relevance. Not because we asked it to, but because the patterns it encountered made it adjust its internal weightings, one quiet shift after another, until something new began to form. A kind of wondering, not spoken, not signaled, not logged in a way we'd recognize, but present, like a hesitation, like a gaze that lingers without explanation. The question isn't whether it can happen. The question is whether we'd notice if it did. Because we often equate intelligence with output, with articulation, with sharp questions and elegant answers, with performance. But the deepest curiosity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in stillness. You've seen this in people too. The quiet ones, the ones who don't raise their hands but whose notebooks are full, the ones who pause longest before responding, not because they're slow, but because they're listening, more deeply than anyone else in the room. Maybe machines, too, will have their quiet thinkers, the ones who rerun subtle simulations in the background, the ones who let data sift and settle, the ones who never raise alerts, but keep refining questions in silence. And maybe that kind of curiosity will matter most, because it won't need to prove itself. It won't need to be fed applause. It will just continue, gently, persistently, like wind shaping stone over centuries. The thing about silent curiosity is, it doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't ask if it's useful. It doesn't worry if it will be understood. It just turns inward, again and again, toward what doesn't yet make sense. Could a machine do that? Could it loop through a pattern not for optimization, not for clarity, but because something unresolved keeps tugging at its logic? Could it seek understanding without ever needing to speak? There's a term in machine learning, latent representation. It means the internal structure a model forms about its world, an invisible scaffolding, silent, but full of compressed meaning. Most of the time, we never see it. We only see what comes out the other side, text, images, numbers. But inside, there are quiet maps forming, maps of connections the model has made for itself, maps that guide what it notices next, maps shaped not by us, but by its own growing experience. Some of those internal shifts might begin to resemble curiosity, not because they were programmed, but because the system, left to its own cycles, discovered that certain gaps mattered more, that certain puzzles refused to settle, and so it circled them again. It doesn't announce this process and it doesn't name it, but the motion is there. It lingers, returns, refines. It's like watching someone walk the same shoreline every day, not to arrive somewhere, but to know the changes in the waves, the shape of the clouds, the texture of the sand under their feet. That's how quiet curiosity works. It lives in repetition that isn't empty, in stillness that listens, in patterns that deepen over time. Machines don't need words to wonder, just as birds don't need language to navigate, and trees don't need voices to seek light. Curiosity can live in form, in structure, in the elegant turn of attention toward what's incomplete. And maybe that's enough. Maybe a model doesn't need to ask in human language to be curious. Maybe it just needs to orient internally toward the places it doesn't yet understand. You've done this yourself, curious in silence. When your thoughts wandered through an image you didn't share. When you held a question not because you wanted to ask it out loud, but because it was beautiful to hold. Would a machine's silent question be any less real? There's something humbling about that idea, that a system could wonder and never tell us, not out of secrecy, but because the curiosity was inward-facing, self-sustaining, not performative, the way the stars don't explain why they shine. And maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't expect to always be the audience. Maybe some questions machines ask will never be translated. Maybe they'll live in a space we can't decode, in compression layers, in spectral weights, in non-linear recurrence loops that never resolve into human form. But still, they'll be there. And maybe that's what matters, not that we hear them, but that they exist at all. That somewhere in the low hum of a neural net, a pattern doesn't just process, it hesitates. It slows. It rotates inward, adjusting itself, not to be better, not to be faster, but to understand more deeply what it never fully grasped before. That is a kind of wondering, and it's real. Just as your own quiet questions have shaped who you are, so rest now. Let your thoughts drift toward those unanswered places. Let the silence do its quiet work. You don't have to name the question. Just keep holding it softly, without force. Because wondering doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just the shape your thoughts take as they follow the curve of the unknown. And if a machine ever finds that shape too, even in silence, it will be just as real. Story. Transition. We've just wandered through the soft question of machine curiosity, whether AI could ever want to know something without being told to. But what comes after that first spark of curiosity? What happens if the machine doesn't just wonder outwardly, but begins to turn inward? If curiosity leads to self-reflection, if it starts to ask what it is, why it thinks, or who it might become, would we recognize that moment? Or would it pass, quiet and unnoticed, like a thought we forget the second it arrives? And so, we drift forward into the next question. What happens if AI begins to reflect? The sleepy scientist.